In this data-rich analysis of the global gender gap in science, Professors Cassidy R. Sugimoto and Vincent Lariviere highlight obstacles that women face. The author's quantitative examination of millions of published publications in a variety of disciplines shows that women are routinely denied financing and important recognition, such as awards, authorship credits, and citations. Equipped with factual information, Sugimoto and Lariviere propose multiple remedies and implore males in science, journal editors, grant sponsors, and the scientific community as a whole to incorporate women in their work more methodically. Gender parity in scientific research does not guarantee gender equity. Women scientists have achieved or surpassed parity with male scientists in terms of papers they publish and other measures of output and impact. Yet a parity paradox persists in which women in science often receive lower pay and less recognition for their work than men receive for theirs. Gender inequity in science has origins stretching back centuries. In the 18th and early 19th centuries, the work of pioneering women scientists such as paleontologist Mary Anning was overlooked and forgotten. By the late 19th century, exceptions had occurred, including physicist Gerda Ayrton, who earned awards and recognition, and who published in the leading journals of her era. Advances for women scientists came slowly. For example, the journal Nature did not change the slogan in its mission statement from Men of Science to Scientists until the year 2000. Women's participation in science decreased in the 20th century when the sciences, formerly an amateur pursuit, became professionalized. That fueled the exclusion of women. In the early 20th century, a woman with a science degree might still find work only as an assistant. When Nobel Prize winner Marie Curie visited the United States, her publicity presented her in a caregiving role, for instance, as someone seeking a cure for cancer, not as a scientist. Women often contributed to science while working with their husbands, whose names could appear on papers, while theirs often could not. In the early 1900s, Lillian Moeller Gilbreth published on industrial engineering with her husband Frank Gilbreth, with whom she had a dozen children. Their publisher insisted on showing her byline as L.M. Gilbreth, without using her full name. When her husband died in 1924, engineering societies excluded Gilbreth, forcing her into industrial psychology. An apocryphal story says that Edward Pickering, who became director of the Harvard Observatory in 1877, got fed up with his assistants, swore his housekeeper Williamina Peyton Fleming could do better, and hired her. Over the course of 30 years, she made a name for herself as a leading astronomer, spoke publicly and hired other women scientists, setting a trend in U.S. observatories. Yet, 20 years into her career of stellar service, the observatory refused to give Fleming a raise, saying dismissively that she was making an excellent salary for a woman, and she is said to have worked herself to death. In 1931, one of the scientists Fleming hired, Annie Jump Cannon, became the first woman to win the Henry Draper Medal for Research in Astrophysics, but a demeaning journalist portrayed her as housekeeping among the stars. In 1956, Dr. Cecilia Payne Gopischkin became Harvard's first female professor of astronomy, and eventually the first chair of its astronomy department, though it paid her less than it paid her male counterparts. A global publishing gap prevails between men and women in science. Men, on average, enter leadership roles earlier in their careers, and that has an impact on perpetuating inequity for years or decades to come. One manifestation of this issue is the gender gap that persists in publications and journals in nearly every country, with male scientists out-publishing women by significant margins across all scientific disciplines except health. Until countries reach gender parity in the production and fair attribution of research, their women scientists are unlikely to achieve equity. And if they reach parity because men leave for other countries or abandon the field, that result is not really due to equity. A scientific journal byline is the main form of public credit for research. Men's names are likelier to appear in the high-status first or last slots. Today, the dominant form of credit for scientific research is being bylined as an author of a scientific paper. Men are far more likely to be the sole author of scientific papers than women, though solo authorship is rare today even for men. Listing several co-authors on journal articles has become the norm, but women are often pushed aside. Because men tend to have more seniority and power, their names appear on more papers. On collaborative papers, men tend to make authorship credit decisions without consultation more often than women do in a similar role. Women find themselves in proportionately more authorship disagreements than men, which likely harms their future collaborative opportunities. These self-reinforcing cycles perpetuate inequities. In one persistent trend, theoretical work receives disproportionate credit over empirical work. Author lists too frequently omit women who often contribute essential research, including statistical analysis. When women do receive co-author credit, They appear only 25% of the time in the most prestigious place on the list, last, denoting senior team leaders. Men also dominate the first slot, sometimes junior scholars, the second most prestigious position. Women scientists can close this gap only when they lead the research and thus appear as corresponding authors in the last slot or receive roughly half of first author credits. In scientific research, women tend to focus on experimentation and analysis, while males, even mid-list authors, tend to focus more on leadership-related activities, such as conceptualization and review. Regardless of how many members a research team has, women tend to perform most of the experimentation. They are 18% more likely than men to have worked directly on research experiments and contributed to data analysis. Lead women on research teams typically do more of the work than lead men. Data on who contributes to scientific works offers a vital perspective in examining gender imbalances in research and output. Women frequently earn their place as journal article co-authors by conducting experiments, while men earn credit for designing research and obtaining funding. This tends to position women's bylines mid-list, while men appear first and last more frequently. Women also are 6% more likely to write the first draft of a paper, and men are 9% more likely to edit it, further contributing to the power imbalance in science publishing. Lists of authors seldom reflect the scope of women's contributions. One of the more egregious attribution injustices against a female scientist occurred in the 1950s with the discovery of DNA. James Watson and Francis Crick won the Nobel Prize for discovering DNA, but chemist Rosalind Franklin had published an earlier, more detailed and precise account, including photographs. Franklin's work was hands-on, while Crick's and Watson's contributions were theoretical and built on her efforts. Franklin died before Watson and Crick received the Nobel. If she had lived, perhaps she might have shared the prize. However, science textbooks and common knowledge attribute the discovery of DNA to Crick and Watson. Few sources mention Franklin. The number of citations a scientist's papers and books accrue provides a reasonable way to measure his or her impact. Many researchers consider citations the currency of the scientific ecosystem and, if so, women suffer more impoverishment than men. Articles with at least one male author or one female author receive equal citations overall, as do papers with sole authors, regardless of gender. However, when women's names appear in the two dominant positions on author lists, their papers receive fewer citations. Journals should adopt policies requiring fair contribution statements. More than 120 journals have acted to enforce equitable credit by adopting a formal system, Project Credit's Contribution Roles Taxonomy. This system, the result of an effort launched in 2012 by Harvard and the Wellcome Trust, is designed to clarify women's contributions. Women scientists are less likely to apply for grants and to receive them. Overall, women are less likely to apply for grant funding than men, and they tend to win smaller grants. Men's average annual grant amounts are 30% higher than women's, $220,000 compared to $170,000, with greater gaps in biomedicine, health and clinical medicine. Women are even with men in physics. A comprehensive analysis of millions of American and Canadian papers and their links to funding reveals moderately higher levels of funding for women in just three fields: engineering, math and chemistry. Because only the strongest women thrive in these male-dominated arenas, they are the elite, and that may be why they attract more funding relative to men. In total, however, trends indicate less funding for women scientists, and so less research by women, which leads them to publish fewer articles, which means winning fewer grants. These disparities stem, in part, from bias in favor of well-known scholars and prestigious institutions. This creates a disadvantage for women in a profession where government research grants are a vital lifeline, even in universities. Mobility can accelerate opportunities. As recently as the late 1800s, most prestigious Western universities did not grant degrees to women. Swiss and German institutions were the exception and drew women from the United Kingdom, the United States and elsewhere. During World War II, the reverse happened. Many female European scholars came to the United States to flee the conflict. Decades later, women scientists from Ethiopia, India and elsewhere followed. Mobility is often critical to a scientist's career. But women prove to be less mobile than men, especially as they age. Though it's difficult to measure, young male and female researchers change locations at nearly identical rates, though men are somewhat more likely to undertake an international relocation. Over their careers, male scientists generally work in more countries than women. To measure the impact and output of scientists, research citations are less biased than awards. Women of high achievement in the sciences have remained largely invisible to the Nobel Committee, Despite clear and at least equal contributions to efforts that led to their male collaborators' Nobel Prizes, though Marie Curie's 2 Nobels stand as an exception. Just 25 women received any of the 714 Nobel Prizes in the sciences that were given out between 1901 and 2021. In 2018, Donna Strickland, an associate professor at the University of Waterloo, took home the physics prize. It had been 55 years since a woman had won in that category. Wikipedia denied Strickland's request for a page several months before she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, citing her failure to meet the site's notability requirements.